I would like to thank the organizers of this seminar for the invitation to share with you my thoughts on what would constitute an excellent educational system. I want to begin with an account or an incident that occurred several years ago when I was invited to a one-day symposium sponsored by the provincial government of Manitoba, which is in central Canada. And the symposium gathered together random parents from across the province as well as business leaders to analyze and discuss the educational system at that time. It became evident, in fact, it was one of the first things that became evident that day, that the business leaders believed that the educational system was producing students who were unemployable. At least a large percentage of them were unemployable. That is, they lacked the basic skill set and sense of responsibility to even employ, to even be successful in a job. Since then, the situation has steadily grown far worse, and in more recent discussions with business leaders here in the area where I now live, which is on the Ontario region of Canada, there is a crisis in trying to find people, graduates of high schools, that can actually work, that actually are employable. So something has gone terribly wrong with our educational system, and it is my hope that as I share some suggestions here, that at least a few of them will be something that spark conversation, ideas, and maybe further action. For the past 40 years, I have focused on teaching mainly university students in universities across Canada, the United States, in the UK, and Ukraine. And as a result, I've had an opportunity to observe the outcome of various educational approaches. I'll make a number of suggestions at this point, but more recently, I have talked in my conversations with business leaders. I have two questions that I've asked, not only to business leaders, but to teachers who still have a very high standard for what they require of their students. The first question is, what do you think the objective or purpose of an excellent education should be? And the second question is, what key components would you suggest that are required for an excellent education? So I'd like to look at both of those questions now. Let's begin with the first one. What should be the purpose or objective out of an excellent education? I would suggest the following. It is to produce young men and women who have achieved a sufficient degree of responsibility, academic integrity, and the essential skill set that will equip them to enter and succeed in the career of their choice, as well as make a positive contribution to their society and to future generations. So the question is, what should be the key components of an excellent educational system that would accomplish that objective? My first suggestion, and I will number them in point form as I go along so that you can follow more readily. Number one, teachers who love teaching and who are good at it. What I mean by that is that it can make a very substantial difference in how well a student absorbs the course material and enjoys the course and wants to continue learning in that area if their teacher is excited and energized by the material, or at least by teaching and imparting this knowledge to their students. On the other hand, a teacher that has little interest in teaching students, gets little enjoyment out of teaching students, can actually destroy a student's love for that subject for life. As an example, our son, one of our boys, I have 4 boys and 2 girls, so we've been very interested in the educational system on our own. But one of our boys just loved mathematics in the very early grades, until he got to grade 5, and then we noticed that his marks plummeted. He had no further interest in mathematics, and we wondered what had happened, so we visited the teacher. Upon our conversation with the teacher, it was evident that, well, he was about to retire that year. It was his last year of teaching. He was utterly disinterested in the course material and in teaching students, and he was merely putting in time until the end of the year. But as a result, his effect, the enthusiasm the students had in his class for learning the material and for continuing on it was destroyed. So it can make a huge difference, and I've seen this in many cases throughout the years, on how energized a teacher is, how they love to teach and impart their knowledge to the students. So I would suggest that in order to cultivate or assemble teachers or a team of teachers like that, there's a couple of criteria I would recommend, 3 of them actually. A, they should be evaluated, the teacher should be evaluated on how well the student mastered the material in that course. And that performance evaluation should be done once a year, and the teacher should be rewarded accordingly. For example, in the first place where I worked as an aeronautical engineer, if you were a good engineer and you excelled that year, you received a substantial or a significant increase in your wages. If you are merely subpar or par, you may have received no increase in wages, or even a decrease as you were shuffled off to another department. Unfortunately, in my area, it is virtually impossible to terminate even the most disinterested teacher because of the strong union protection there. So consequently, our students often get a mix of teachers who really enjoy the course material, love teaching, and then there's a minority of teachers who really should be moved on to a different career. Secondly, or B, the teacher should be evaluated on how well the students enjoyed the course, but that's only given they were successful in the first point, in how well the students mastered the material. So it's actually a bonus if the students actually enjoyed that material and really enjoyed the teacher. That's a bonus. But the main factor involved in assembling an excellent team of teachers is in how well the students have mastered the material at the end of the year. Not all good teachers will be enjoyed by the students, but the outcome will tell the story as to how effective that teacher is. And finally, we have a problem here in Canada. I don't know what it's like in Europe, but in Canada, of a small percentage of teachers in each school that are actually social activists, that are more interested in imposing ideologies on the students, woke ideologies, very liberal left ideologies, at the expense of teaching honest teaching of the course material, or even academic integrity. Some will reinterpret history, for example, to suit their purposes or to suit their ideologies. So a third aspect that a teacher needs to be evaluated on is academic honesty. Do they actually approach and teach their courses with an honesty with the course material, with what actually they are supposed to teach, rather than try and use that as a platform to impose ideologies on the students? My second major suggestion is that students would advance to the next level only when they have achieved the required level of competence. And the key word here is competence. The wrong approach, which is what's practiced here in our province where I live now, is that the student is passed regardless of what their performance was, with the hope that it'll encourage them and make them more confident if they don't fail. And that has failed miserably in preparing students to be employable once they graduate, failed miserably in preparing them for the real world outside of the school system. For example, I was talking with a teacher just a couple of days ago who had a student who only showed up a few times during the year, did none of the homework assignments, and failed the exam with a percentage of around 5%. She had no choice but to fail the student. The high school principal called her into the office and said, "We don't fail students here," overrode the teacher's recommendation and passed that student into the next level. But how does that prepare the student to be a successful citizen in society once they graduate? If they've just been handed, there's no consequences for focusing on their studies, no consequences for a lack of responsibility, and so forth. The third suggestion I'd like to make is academic competence in core subjects, and specifically I want to look briefly at what core subjects should be required. First of all, in the area of literature, literature has a huge effect in expanding a person's thinking and awareness beyond the rut that we all tend to naturally fall into. So the best literature that is available in that school's language should form the major component of, for example, the literature they're required to study and read. Unfortunately, here in Canada, the focus is on reading Canadian content, but our population is slightly less than 40 million. Well less than 10% of the population in the world of English-speaking people. Consequently, our students are deprived of some of the best examples, some of the highest standards of English literature, because they're required to read Canadian content. Now, I should say there are a few excellent Canadian authors, but the pool to draw from is much smaller. With regard to reading and writing, I think reading is the key here. If the reading is excellent and thorough, the writing will follow from that largely, although of course there are things to teach in that area. But there's often an assumption, in fact, almost unanimously in all of the people I've seen, there's an assumption that by the time a student graduates, they can read well. For the last 10 years, I have been astonished when I ask high school students to read aloud, how many, maybe over half of them, are still sounding out their words and stumbling when they read. This is not a satisfactory level of competence. And if that is the case, reading aloud, it reflects a lack of development in the area of just reading, even reading silently. And if that is the case, then the writing that they produce will suffer accordingly. Mathematics and science, of course, are essential and should be taught to the level that will be required to achieve the purpose statement that I suggested at the beginning, to prepare them for the real world, to enter the workforce or university. History must be taught honestly and objectively, with the purpose of making valid observations from which important conclusions can be drawn. A lot of times history in the past was just composed of memorizing dates and events, and that badly falls short of what we can learn from history. We can learn lessons so that we don't have to repeat the same things. Today, however, history is being used to promote certain ideologies. It's being rewritten, reinterpreted in a way that's not honest, actually, to what actually occurred. There's a lack of academic integrity when it comes to teaching history in our public school system, and that needs to be rectified. We need to know what actually happened in the past, and we need to have a good enough idea of what happened so that we can observe certain causes and effects so that we don't repeat the same mistakes of history. I think fine arts should also be included as a core requirement in a good educational system. That may include music, it may include painting, photography, and so forth. The reason that I say that is that the fine arts have an ability to develop an area of the student's brain that might not otherwise be developed. And a good educational system will develop the full range, or try to develop the full range of what the human brain is capable of, and not just focus on one aspect of the brain at the expense of the more creative aspect. And the creative aspect of the brain can feed back into the other aspects of problem solving and so forth. Now, the student might not be necessarily talented in a particular area of the arts, but they should be allowed the freedom to explore and find what areas they are most talented in, even if it's never going to be a master's level achievement. But they should be encouraged to at least develop that area to some extent, to the best of their ability, in order to develop that area of their brain. An essential aspect, though, in teaching art as a core requirement is to develop an understanding, that student needs to have an understanding of what distinguishes poor art from good art, or poor art from great art. And also, along with that, they should be supplied with examples of great art to which they can aspire, or which at the very least can give them ideas of what they could do themselves creatively. I don't see a whole lot of distinction made nowadays between really bad art and good art. Everything is thought to be good art, but it isn't. And we're doing our students a disservice. We don't teach them how to distinguish between good art and bad art. For example, in music, they might be taught to look at not only the tune, but the arrangement of the tune, the lyrics that go along with that tune, and how the whole thing is put together would be ones that to judge the different aspects of that music. How does the music affect them? Does it only affect them in the short term and they're soon tired of that? Or is a piece of art such that they could enjoy it over the long term? That is the mark, one of the marks of good art. Finally, in this section 3, I think we need to have a system of channeling students into different streams that meet the needs of the students. For example, right now in my province, they are going through the final phase of what was called de-streaming. And what that means is that everybody, even if they're very intelligent and gifted in that area, or are intellectually challenged in the area of learning, or find it learning very difficult, there's just going to be one set of courses to fit all students. 2 teachers have talked to me in the last few days about this, and who have very high standards, and they are deeply disappointed in this because the needs of those students who have learning disabilities will not be met, nor will the needs of those students who are in the upper half of their intellectual capabilities in learning. Instead, they said they will have to teach to what they described as a lower middle standard. So if we rated the degree of difficulty or complexity or achievement in an area of education on a scale from 1 to 10, they're going to have to teach at about the 4 level, about level 4, in order to teach in such a way that even the lower half, those who have learning disabilities, can pass the courses, in theory at least. Instead, we need to be able to meet the needs of those who have learning disabilities. We need a stream for those students. We need a stream for the average students who maybe are not particularly gifted, nor do they have learning disabilities, and we need a stream for those who are more gifted in the area of learning so that they can really expand and pursue their areas of interest. The 4th suggestion I would like to make is competence in critical thinking and academic integrity. It needs to be taught, and the students need to be trained in how to achieve that. And I have a number of suggestions, subpoints under that, which I will go from A to H. So A, the student needs competence in formulating not only a valid argument, but one that contains premises that are at least plausible at the very least. And B, they need competence and integrity in summarizing opposing arguments. For example, in philosophy, as I was pursuing a graduate degree there, it was absolutely essential as a matter of ethics that whenever we responded to an opposing argument, that we summarize that opposing argument accurately enough so that the person who had presented that argument was satisfied that we had understood the argument and that we were honestly representing that argument. That is abysmal today on the social media, in the news, and in general. People are not interested. It seems that the opposite is true. And we need to stop this. We need people who can, you cannot even address an opposing argument unless you understand it and can accurately summarize it. C, we need excellence in identifying faulty logic. So once the ability to summarize an argument in, say, the form of a syllogism has been achieved, and that's not difficult, that would be about the grade 10 or 11 level in high school, then the next step, then one is in a position to be able to see if there's any logical fallacies that are committed in that argument. And along with that, we come to D, which is students need to be able to identify sophistry. Sophistry is a series of maybe fallacious or slightly fallacious arguments mixed with truth. They're often presented in a articulate way, sometimes by very intelligent people, to add some persuasive force to them. But when you actually analyze how did that conclusion follow from where we started here, you see that there's a major problem. Sophistry is rampant today in our culture, and a good education must include teaching the student the ability to recognize and call out sophistry. E, students need to be given or trained in the ability to apply critical thinking to social media, politicians, and social activists. F, they need competence in analyzing and applying critical thinking to their own beliefs, to the very things they want to believe, but actually might not be true. And again, our culture today is doing very badly in this area. In fact, many people define truth as what they believe to be true, which boils down to what they want to believe is true. We can't afford to train students without the ability to actually analyze their own beliefs and what they want to believe. G, we need competence in discussing opposing views in a thoughtful, informed, and gracious way, rather than using noisemakers, megaphones, and deplatforming people, which is going in the wrong direction as a civilization. That's what animals do. And unfortunately, I see a lot of that occurring, simply trying to drown out the opposing arguments so that they're not even given a hearing. We need to train our students to actually be able to engage the opposition in a gracious, intelligent way. We need to train them in the art of asking the right questions if the opposing team is not interested in listening to what we have to say. At least train them in the art of asking the right questions, which can, in turn, reveal the weak points in the other person's position. And finally, H, under section 4, is we need to train them in how to gather and evaluate evidence. Not just evidence for something, but is there any evidence that falsifies that theory? That is another urgent need in a good education. My fifth suggestion is a good work ethic that is consistently instilled and encouraged. Students must be taught that there are very real rewards and consequences. For example, homework must be completed on time and with rewards or penalties associated based on how they do in that area, so that you're teaching them that there are consequences, that they need to take certain responsibilities if they want to succeed and move ahead. Another thing that's critical in the area of a good work ethic is respect for authority, employers, deadlines, boundaries, and natural law. For example, we need a standard of discipline and behavior in the classroom that is expected, required, with appropriate consequences if a student fails to meet that standard. And somehow it needs to be understood by the parents that this needs to occur. If the parent is going to expect a school system or an educational system to prepare our students for the real world, where one can lose their job if they simply do not exercise the work ethic or have a poor work ethic. And suggestion item C under this fifth suggestion is that students need the ability to focus for an extended period of time to solve difficult problems. I spoke with a professor in engineering at the University of Waterloo, and he says at least half the students have lost the ability to focus for an extended period of time on a difficult problem because they have been so trained to find fast answers through social media and the internet. And if we want to advance as a civilization, we need to realize that not everything has fast answers that can be instantly found on the internet. In order to move ahead, there are problems that we face that may require hours, days, or even years of intense focus and analysis. The last suggestion I would like to make for an excellent educational system is that we need to train our students in a basic philosophy of what it means to be human. The purpose here is to awaken the student to the possibility that we're not just animals. We might not just be animals. There might be a God. there might be very real, objective moral values and moral laws that minimize human suffering and maximize human flourishing, and that we might actually have an eternal soul, and that each person might have a very real value and purpose that is higher than whatever purpose and value we may tend to make up for ourselves. Now, I have three things to say under this. A, care must be taken when it comes to secular institutions and individuals being entrusted with spiritual teaching. In other words, I'm not talking about religious instruction here. Rather, there are excellent secular philosophical arguments for the existence of God, arguments that talk about the existence of God and the problem of evil and suffering, and so forth. B, we must also teach the students the counter-arguments to these things so that they can discuss these in a gracious, thoughtful, and collegial way. In fact, discussions of religion, ideologies, and politics can be an excellent environment within which to train students how to discuss things in a calm, thoughtful, and gracious way. And finally, C, the literature has demonstrated that there are very clear pro-social benefits to the belief that there is a higher purpose for humanity, and especially there might be a God who is the origin of every good thing given and every perfect gift. I want to close with a quote from Socrates as described by Plato in the dialogue called Phaedo. In this dialogue, Socrates was about to die and he made this statement: "If the soul is immortal, it demands our care not only for that part of time which we call life, but for all time. And indeed, it would seem now that it will be extremely dangerous to neglect it. If death were a release from everything, it would be a boon for the wicked, because by dying, they would be released not only from the body, but also from their own wickedness together with the soul. But as it is, since the soul is clearly immortal, it can have no escape or security from evil, except by becoming as good and wise as it possibly can be." And I think that quote from Socrates applies to a lot of things, and I'll close with that. Thank you once again. It's a pleasure to give this seminar, and once again, I thank you for the organizers of this lecture.